What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. Now People Can Fly have recently blessed us by starting to reveal some of the new legendaries which we'll be seeing in the expansion Worldslayer, which is dropping at the end of June. So far 3 of these weapons have been revealed, so I wanted to spend some time in this video and look at these weapons, but more importantly also look at the mods which come on these weapons, because these are 3 brand new mods which haven't been in the game before and will surely be quite powerful once we start actually slapping them onto other weapons. Now the 3 weapons we're going to be looking at today is Deathscape, Vortex and Sunfall, and as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at the weapon itself first and then at the mod and discussing what the possible applications of that would be. So starting with Deathscape first, and something worth noting for all 3 of these weapons is the information shared by People Can Fly feature apocalypse tier versions of these weapons. So you'll notice that they have 3 mods instead of 2. Of course, the standard versions of these weapons will only have 2 of these mods on, but this is worth noting just to kind of set the tone that you don't look at these and think, holy shit, all new weapons drop with 3 tiers. This is a new tier of item which is available when Worldslayer comes out, which means that gear has a small chance of dropping an apocalypse version of it, and this is a 3rd mod that's on there. So for the sake of this weapon, the one that we're seeing on the screen here right now, the Deathscape itself is an assault rifle, and generally speaking assault rifles are in a fairly good place in this game. They are quite fairly used and they feature a high rate of fire, decent clip size, and if you have good mods on there, you can actually get these mods to trigger quite regularly. Also, the other thing that I like about assault rifles is the fact that your range of engagement is pretty wide, so you can use them up close if you want to, but they're also pretty good at picking targets off from medium to long range. Now specifically, the Deathscape itself is an assault rifle in the standard variant, so not the most popular tactical variant that we like with assault rifles, but nonetheless a standard one with a clip size of 40 by default, and then obviously the standard rate of fire and everything that we expect from an assault rifle. Now that's basically what it comes down to. So I really like the fact that this is an assault rifle. You can keep stigmatized, which is the new mod that's on here, on there, and you can put something else beneath it that also triggers quite regularly depending on which class you're playing, maybe. And this weapon is obviously heavily flavored towards technomancers, but not only them, but definitely towards technomancers. And this is a fantastic weapon to bundle with a kind of poison freeze playstyle that you might be seeing from the Borealis side. So stigmatized combined with something like ultimate freeze bullets, I think can be quite cute. And again, what we have to realize is this opens up the field heavily once we start considering apocalypse tier weapons, and the fact that this weapon can in actual fact have 3 mods on. But more specifically, when we look at the unique new mod that comes with Deathscape, this is called stigmatized. And essentially this says successful shots, just shots, not critical or anything like that, just shots, inflict toxic and a 5-second mark. Killing a marked enemy causes them to explode, dealing X amount of damage, of course, applicable to the level of the weapon, in a 10-meter radius, and applying the mark to enemies within the explosion radius. So this is essentially creating this kind of like a plague wave through the enemies, and this is going to be super effective to deal with large groups of small to medium-sized enemies, as essentially hitting the enemies on the one side of the pack will cause this disease to ripple through the enemies and essentially decimate them in groups. Now this is on a 5-second cooldown, so it's not that often that it can proc. Of course, we have often seen weapons and mods that have cooldowns of 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, so 5 seconds is a little bit long. But the bottom line is, if you can make sure that enemies are relatively clustered together, you can essentially wait for those 5 seconds to pass before you apply the next one, because in that time your toxic is going to be dealing a whole bunch of damage. Again, bearing in mind that in the typical technomancer build that you would slot this into, you're already dealing a whole bunch of additional damage to enemies that are toxic. And this, combined with the firepower bullet build that you often get with technomancer, I think this is going to fit in quite nicely into that meta, and I'm super excited to get my hands on this weapon. So definitely keep your eyes out for Deathscape. Next up we have Sunfall. Now the weapon itself is a submachine gun, again in the standard variant, and personally I am not a huge fan of submachine guns. I don't think there are many really good ones in the game. This one might change my mind, but the bottom line is the engagement range of a submachine gun is fairly short, and then because they have such a high rate of fire, it means that you can often exhaust your clip quite easily on 1 or 2 enemies, just by sort of spraying and praying, and therefore potentially missing out on additional damage that you could be dealing because you are reloading. That being said, when you combine this particular new mod called Firestorm with the setup that you get from a submachine gun, it kind of makes sense why they stuck it on a submachine gun. Now, Firestorm itself says successful shots summon a homing firestorm that deals, a level equivalent amount of damage to whatever the level of the gun is, and inflicts burn to enemies within its radius over 10 seconds. Now, the radius, in other words, the girth of this beam, increases with each successful shot on the afflicted target. This is pretty sweet, because it means that, let's say you have an example of a boss with a bunch of small enemies around it. You can essentially immediately hit the boss with this and pour all of your bullets into the boss, which will slowly start increasing the radius of that beam, and potentially then also hitting the enemies that are clustered around this boss. Now, I think this weapon works, and more specifically this mod works very well on stationary enemies or enemies that move very slow. It's unclear to me just how fast the tracking of this beam is from the footage that we've seen, or if it even in actual fact tracks quite effectively. At this moment in time, it kind of doesn't look like that to me. That being said, I do like the idea of the fact that the more bullets going into this, increasing the width of this beam. And to me, that means that unless there's a finite amount that you can increase the size of this beam to, if you put something like Firestorm on a gun that has, I don't know, a massive clip, and that can very fast empty that massive clip, anything that's bigger than the 50 on a submachine gun, or more specifically, maybe find some way of enhancing the clip size of the weapon that you have, then it'll be quite interesting to see how big you can actually make this beam, and essentially, see how much area you can cover with it. What is important though is that the damage of the beam, however, is not increased by ramping up the size. The size means that you hit more stuff, but the damage level stays the same. One other thing worth noting here is that the cooldown of this is also massive. This is 15 seconds, so it really plays into the power of this weapon, that it's kind of like a once shot and then kind of empowering it to be bigger. But I definitely do think that this is going to be interesting if you find ways of choking off certain parts of the map. So for instance, if a bunch of enemies are going to come out a specific place and you can catch an enemy in that sort of general vicinity right before those enemies appear, you could hit that enemy and essentially start charging up your laser, and then all the other enemies are going to come running through that. This is going to be super interesting in creature-based maps where the AI essentially dictates that they run at you in essentially like a straight line. So if you can hit the first enemy in that line and get the beam to grow, you're going to make them all run through that beam, and that's going to be pretty sweet. It's also going to be really cool to see if you have multiples on this. If 3 people are employing this and putting these beams everywhere, you're going to be able to create null zones on the map where enemies just simply cannot survive as they try to run through them. Our last weapon of the 3 is a brand new automatic sniper rifle of the legendary variety called Vortex. It's a full auto variant, and that officially makes it the gun type that I've used the least in Outriders. I'm not a huge fan of this archetype due to the clip size that these weapons have, just generally the way that they fire, and there not really being any good ones of these in the game. So I'm not a huge fan, and so that's basically already making it seem to me like with this weapon itself, the first and the only thing I'll want to do is actually strip the mod off there and apply it on other weapons. Now, if I end up being wrong and that this automatic sniper rifle is the shit with this mod on and a random rolled apocalypse one on there, and then the second one which you make of your own choosing, I'll be the first one to make a video on that and declare that I had it completely wrong. But for now, I'm really excited to get my hands on this new mod called Slashing Twister. Now, Slashing Twister itself says successful shots, and this is, again, doesn't have to be critical, create a tornado that lasts 8 seconds and deals a fixed amount of damage based on the level of the weapon every 0.5 seconds. So it deals its damage 16 times. The effect gets larger over time, and this lasts for its cooldown, is 6 seconds. So as this twister is spinning, it actually increases in diameter, and it means that more enemies will wander into it. And basically how we saw with the previous weapon, this is a fantastic way to deny an area and essentially force enemies to take damage. But when we look at the actual damage scaling of this versus the previous weapon that we saw, we see that even though the item levels are the same, this is far higher. and it also has a relatively low cooldown of 6 seconds. This means to me that this can potentially be one of the powerful mods that we'll see emerging from this expansion. Definitely, there's a whole bunch more stuff we have to see. There are so many new pieces of legendary gear, weapons and armor included, so it's super early for me to sit here and declare, wow, this is like the most important mod for you to get from the expansion. But it certainly seems like it's one of the more powerful ones, just from a usage perspective. The fact that it has such a low cooldown and the fact that it has such a large amount of damage that it deals. I also like the fact that it grows in size, so again, we'd have to see it in practice to see just how large this can grow. But again, as my previous example, you can use this to deny entry into a certain area, or at the very least, once enemies start rushing you like monsters, you can shoot one right close to you and actually go stand in the vortex, which means as enemies try to come up to you and melee you, they're going to get hit by this vortex and get taken out. So you can essentially create a little protective area for yourself to exist in and essentially survive. But that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments down below which one of these weapons, or more specifically these new mods, have you all hot and bothered, which ones you think are the more powerful ones, and which ones are you really looking forward to getting your hands on as soon as the expansion comes out. I'm really excited to the fact that People Can Fly are sharing some of these details with us on the run up to the expansion. It definitely does increase the excitement factor of the game coming out as we all patiently sit here and wait for the end of June. Also want to take this opportunity to apologize for the quality of my voice. I am currently just coming off like a ridiculous flu, but I didn't want to wait until, you know, I was back to 100% to put this information out there. I kind of want to just share this and get your guys' opinion on it. But thanks, and it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, a great afternoon, and a super awesome evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me.